The Business of Biotech is produced by Life Science Connect and its community of learning, solving, and sourcing resources for biopharma decision makers. If you're working on biologics process development and manufacturing challenges, you need to swing by bioprocessonline.com. If you're trying to stay ahead of the cell or gene therapy curve, visit cellandgene.com. When it's time to map out your clinical course, let clinicalleader.com help. And if optimizing outsourcing decisions is what you're after, check out outsourcepharma.com. We're Life Science Connect, and we're here to help. If you listen to the Business of Biotech regularly, it's a safe assumption that you're in the business of biotech or want to be. And if you're in the business of biotech or want to be, you really need to know Luke Timmerman. Luke is one of the more colorful characters on the scene, a talented and prolific content creator. His decades-long coverage of the space gives him a really important perspective. But even more importantly, at least from my perspective, is the way Luke has managed to mash up his personal and professional passions to do extraordinarily good philanthropic work for some of the organizations our industry cares deeply about. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech. And on today's show, I'm honored to welcome Luke Timmerman, who I've been courting to be my guest for quite some time now. Luke, it's great to finally get you on the show. Welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Good to be here. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah. And we're going to get into some business stuff. We're going to get into some market stuff. We're going to talk shop a little bit. But I'm going to start with your what I'm assuming to be your original passion, because it's going to dovetail nicely, I think, into this mashup that I referenced, the professional and personal mashup, and the personal passion is your mountaineering. You're an accomplished mountaineer, and from what I understand, you just returned from a big trip. So I want to hear about that. I want to hear about the trip. And I want to hear about this passion, like where it's rooted, how long you've been doing it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Matt. I just got back from Manaslu, which is the 8th highest mountain in the world in Nepal. It's a little over 8,100 meters high, or 26,000 and some feet for those of us on the English system. And so that was a personal climb that I've been wanting to go back to Nepal since climbing Mount Everest, which more people have heard of 5 years ago. So, there's that COVID thing happened, and, it was kind of harder to travel around to mountains around the world for a while. And so I set that goal of going back to the Himalayas and climbing a great and beautiful peak, and was fortunate enough to go and have great weather and good climbing conditions and a great group of guys. And I just had a really fun time.
Yeah. You were telling me before we started to record that the adjustment, not just like the adjustment getting back to work, but the physical adjustment upon return is something to be reckoned with. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, yeah. So climbing 8,000 meter peaks, these are the ones that require supplemental oxygen for all but the very top 1% of all mountaineers. So you're entering what they call the death zone above 8,000 meters, where the body really cannot exist for very long. So you're on supplemental oxygen. It's very stressful on all of your systems. So it takes a little while to recover after you go up and summit one of those. So, about a week or 10 days at home, it took to get just feeling back to normal.
Back to normal, yeah. When did you start mountaineering? Like in earnest, right? Like in a intentional way.
Yeah. So this started about 20 years ago, 2004. I was living in Seattle, and like a lot of Seattleites, you look out the window on some clear days and you can see Mount Rainier, this glorious volcano in the distance and the Cascades. And a couple of old college buddies had proposed, like, hey, come out to visit me in Seattle. We had talked about doing various things outside. And one of them actually suggested, let's go climb Mount Rainier. So we did it for fun, for camaraderie, as like a guy's trip, and, exploring this great peak and seeing how we would do physically. So it combined a number of things like the aesthetics, the camaraderie, the physical challenge. And I found right away that I was hooked. Like I really enjoyed the mountains and wanted to get out and climb more and more.
Yeah. So that was 20 years ago. And that is, if I'm not mistaken, that's somewhere right around the time that you started covering the biotech space, right? Has it been about 20 years since you started
It's a little
biotech?
more. I started covering biotech before discovering the mountains.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to rewind a little bit, I originally from Wisconsin, upper Midwestern. Maybe you can even hear it in the accent at times. But I moved out to Seattle after graduating college, got my first kind of big city newspaper job at the Seattle Times in, let's see, this was 2000. And I started out just like a lot of beginning reporters covering general assignments all around town. And then it gravitated toward business, general, like variety of business stories I got to write about. And about a year in, the opportunity came to me to do one of two things, which was either cover the biotechnology industry for the local newspaper or retail. And this, I look back on this sometimes as a kind of a fateful decision, because I could have covered Starbucks, even ultimately Amazon, and like really big, prominent companies that have a national following. I thought that, well, that was kind of interesting. But then I looked at biotech and I knew nothing about it. I mean, nothing at all. But it had science, human health implications. There was business. And it was a strange kind of business. Like you have to raise money first, and then it's very speculative before you would ever like have a product and generate revenue. So what's that all about? And then we're interesting people. I just thought, wow, there are a lot of interesting ingredients for storytelling. And it just so happened that in Seattle, we had a little bit of a cluster of interesting companies working on cancer drugs and immunology. And particularly, we had an anchor company called Immunex, which developed Enbrel. And Enbrel is a household name now, one of the biggest selling drugs of all time. It's now marketed by Amgen. And that was making a big difference for patients. And so I had something tangible that I could report on.
Yeah.
And they had a whole set of issues, manufacturing-wise and business-wise. And so there was a set of circumstances there that really got me hooked on biotech, and trying to learn the science and the business as best I could, so that I could then explain it to a general interest audience in greater Seattle.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So that was the beginnings. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. There's so much material and the people are great. I mean, I've only been in this space for a few years now. It's been, I think, 3 years since I've been covering this space, but through through this podcast and other opportunities, I've had the opportunity to talk to, hundreds of biotech execs, emerging biotech execs. And I've been a journalist for a long time. This is my favorite coverage area I've covered a lot of spaces. Retail, by the way, being one of them. This is way better. You made the right choice. So that from there, where you eventually, I don't want to skip ahead. I want to hit fast forward, but I know you eventually ended up in the biotech press. I mean, specific to biotech, right? Was that the next move?
Well, sort of, yes. So this was. Again, the early 2000s, I worked at the Seattle Times for about, 6 years. And so I learned a lot. I got to cover a lot of different companies and different therapeutic areas. The people, as you mentioned, were terrific. They really took me by the hand and explained, okay, here's what a cancer vaccine is, and here's what we're doing. They like talking about what they do and educating people. And I was an eager student. So I found this just really interesting. And at some point I had to decide, okay, I'm going to commit myself long term. Like this is really going to be my specialty, rather than work in a general interest newspaper. People will often rotate from one area to another. Like I could have gone and covered Microsoft, say, after 5 years, or Boeing or something else. I decided not to do that. I was going to double down and make biotech my long-term commitment. And so, a bunch of things happened. I did a fellowship year at MIT for science journalists, which was fantastic. And we can talk about that if you want. But after that, newspapers were, struggling with this thing called the internet in the mid 2000s. And I thought maybe it's a good idea for me to think about electronic media being a part of that in some way. So I went to Bloomberg News, and I actually moved to San Francisco, which did a couple things. It got me into this different style of journalism, a little faster tempo, more suited to the internet. But also,
how'd you feel about that? Let me just ask you real quick. How'd you feel about that at the time? Like, did you feel like you were letting go of something important within your own ability, like your creativity, your thoughtfulness?
Yes, that's a very good question. There was so much pressure to move fast at a wire service on the breaking news that there wasn't as much oxygen and space to do those longer form, deeper dive pieces that I like doing at the newspaper. I found that out, later. But also, well, on the good side, I got to expand my repertoire to national coverage. So I got to cover Genentech and Amgen and Gilead, and for a different audience, financial in nature. But I learned a lot. But I also learned that I missed covering the startup world, where I thought a lot of the innovation was happening. And I wanted that flexibility to do some quick twitch breaking news, but also have that slow twitch fiber where I could do deeper dive features, more thoughtful reporting.
Yeah. That's interesting. MIT Science Fellowship for Journalism. This is interesting. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, so it's actually called the Knight Science Journalism Fellowship at MIT, and named after the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation of Knight Ridder newspapers fortune. And so I took a sabbatical year with the permission of my bosses at the Seattle Times, moved to Cambridge, worked with a group of a dozen or so science journalists from around the world. And we had twice weekly seminars where famous scientists would come in and talk to us about what they were doing. We could audit classes. You get a student ID card, so you got access to the whole candy store of MIT and Harvard too. Go to the library, go to the gym, be a visiting fellow with no real responsibilities other than learning.
Absorbing,
It's a pretty good gig if you can get it. But that year gave me some time and space to think about what I really wanted to do long term, and it really was chronicling this biotech revolution. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to learn more about people doing other things in different parts of the country, different parts of the world, learning about different disease areas like Alzheimer's and diabetes. What are the pertinent questions in these fields? What are scientists really stumped by, and what are the humps they got to get over to develop more effective therapies and diagnostics? Made that commitment about a little more than 15 years ago.
Yeah. And I know there are at least two more stops on the journey to where you are today. You went into the trade press, so you moved into at some point. And again, I don't want to miss any important parts in between. But I know at some point, you moved into the trade press, and then from there, capitalized on Timmerman himself.
Yeah. So there's a couple important stops. So I was at Bloomberg in San Francisco. And actually, one of my former fellows from the MIT program called me up and said, "Hey, we're starting a new startup called Xconomy, and it's going to be all about the innovation community. So high tech, biotech, clean tech, all these companies that are in startup land, let's say, in geographically undercovered areas. So companies in the San Francisco Bay Area were getting a fair bit of coverage, but there's all this activity happening in places like Boston and Seattle and San Diego and points in between. And our idea, and we got a little bit of venture capital funding, is to start a company that covers the most innovative things in these areas. And I thought, wow, I kind of like to move back to Seattle, start a bureau there, give it a go on the wild and woolly internet of the late aughts. And we'll try to figure out our business model on the way. But I was there for 6 years, thereabouts, opened up 5 or 6 bureaus around the country or collaborated with colleagues. So I was the biotech guy, working with tech journalists. And I just learned a ton at this stop about entrepreneurship as a journalism entrepreneur. Like, what does it take to build an audience, build a sustainable revenue model?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, in my journalism, I'm interviewing biotech entrepreneurs, asking them about, well, how do they create sustainable revenue models and raise capital and hit their milestones?
Yeah.
I'm editing tech journalists, so I'm learning a little bit about how technology instruments can influence life sciences, like the development of new drugs and diagnostics. Just a fabulous experience in many, many ways. But just to fast forward, I had this itch to write a book. I took some time off after Economy to write that book, which was a biography of Leroy Hood, the developer, the leader of the team that developed the first automated DNA sequencing instruments. Yeah. There's that nexus of technology and biology, sparking the genomics age, precision medicine that we're seeing today. Yeah. So I was really passionate about that project. I took some time off. I thought
the book. Well, hang on, before you go any further, I'm going to help you plug that. But the book, the book is, I'm assuming it's still available on Amazon, right? You can still go on Amazon. It's called Hood, Trailblazer of the Genomics Age. Luke Timmerman, 2016. Look it up.
Yeah.
There's your plug.
It's available. Yes. So during the book leave, I thought hard about coming back to that business model, sustainable revenue. What did I want for that next stage of my career? And I thought about I thought about the advertising kind of click-through based free content models really struggling. I mean, we struggled with that at Economy. Others did too in those years. We ended up at Economy settling on events, like conferences, organizing conferences as a big part of the business. Yeah. And while I learned how to do that and enjoyed doing that, it also was exhausting at some point. I was running events all around the country, and it wasn't, I thought it was taking away some of that time from some of that reporting, coming back to something you said earlier that I really wanted to do, that I enjoyed, and I knew that the readers valued. So I thought, can I come up with a subscription-based model, a low-priced subscription where readers are paying me directly for a month, a quarter, or a year at a time for high-quality biotech journalism that they can count on. And I didn't need to reach 100,000 readers every story in order for that model to pencil out and pay for my mortgage and support my family and all that. So I crunched some of the numbers, and I thought, this is what I think I need to do. I need to get 1,000 paying subscribers in the first year to convince myself that this was a worthy venture. And sure enough, I was able to do that. And gosh, that was almost 9 years ago now. Been able to run the Timmerman Report, covering lots of interesting stories like I have always wanted to do.
Yeah, no, it's fast. And it gives you the opportunity. I asked that question earlier about, like, because I lived through the same, a very similar story through, the dawning of the internet. I wasn't a newspaper guy, but we were a magazine guy, like magazine people. Like, our publishing company published magazines, and boy, that change came on quick and hard and caused us to do some, really significant realignments, I'd say, of our business proposition. But with that came sort of that, a loss to me at one point where I felt like the depth was lost to the speed and quick hit kind of stuff. Now, what you're doing, you have the opportunity to scratch both those itches, right? Like, I mean, you cover I mean, I know you cover like financial news and deals and sort of daily, almost daily stuff, but you also have an opportunity to dig a little bit deeper with personalities and people who are leading in biotech right now.
Yes. I don't have a comprehensive breaking news approach. I do not try to be readers' one-stop shop for just everything that happened every day of the week. I don't think that's really sustainable as a sole proprietor operator. So I try to be.
It would kill you. Are you kidding?
Yeah. I try to be selective. So I pick my shots, a couple of startups each week that I like to dig in on and highlight and provide some greater context, a little more reporting than you would get off of, just here's what crossed the wire in a press release today.
Yeah.
I also do some aggregation with a weekly column that actually does compile a sort of an executive summary of what I think of as the most important news for busy biotech executives each week, along with some commentaries that I think I can bring about where I think things might be going. But the one avenue for this in-depth reporting that you're referring to, another newer one, is my own podcast, the Long Run podcast, where I will often pick entrepreneurs or scientists or sometimes venture capitalists who I've had occasion to get to know through my daily writing coverage, and who I think have deeper stories that can be told in this highly immersive form of medium. I get them to tell their personal stories, their backgrounds, where they come from, how they decided to do what they do, and then dig into what they're working on in a way, and try to get them to speak in a way that makes the science accessible to somebody who's not a specialist in that area.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a fun medium, but I plugged your book, so you're not allowed to plug your podcast anymore. I'm just
Fair
kidding.
enough.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I feel like you and I could talk about like the publishing industry, just with just as much passion, insight, and fond and not so fond recollection as the biotech space. But I want to be conscious of our time here, and I want to get to the mashup that I mentioned, and talk a bit about the Timmerman Traverse. So this mashup, you have created a thing, and I'm going to let you explain it. I'm not going to try to do it. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you've created a thing that marries this personal passion with industry called the Timmerman Traverse. Tell us about it. How do you what's your Timmerman Traverse elevator pitch?
Yeah, so it goes back to my background in journalism. So by about, let's see, origins are in 2017. I had started Timmerman Report and had reached that threshold of viability. And, getting a company started, it's an all-consuming thing. So for 2-3 years, that's just all I really had time to think about and do. But 2017, I started thinking, and I had made one of these influential people in biotech lists. Yeah. And, I was writing columns. I have opinions. Sometimes people agree with them. Sometimes they don't. Right. Yeah. And I thought, okay, well, you know what? If this is really true, if I actually have this influence, maybe I can channel it in a more direct way to encourage this audience of people who I've built over the years, the reputation track record. Can I encourage them? Can I use what I have to encourage them to give back in a big way to something that I care about, and I know a lot of these readers do too. And at the time, that was cancer research. It still is. So now, in parallel, so that was sort of where I was professionally at that point.
It hadn't crossed your mind. It hadn't crossed your mind at this point. Like you thought, like, how can I exert my influence to good effect? But it hadn't crossed your mind at that point to like, I guess you hadn't formed up what it was going to be. Like you want to do something, but you don't know what it's going to be yet.
Yeah, well, and journalists, we're taught from an early age to kind of be detached and not really get involved in causes. So
Yeah.
I kind of had to get over that and recognize that I think I was in a little different place and that I really um, could and should use this influence. There are journalists who get involved in things that they believe in that are good causes.
Sure.
So I and I had the freedom and independence to do such a thing. So I had to figure out, well, what would that be? Now, you had mentioned earlier the mountaineering. In parallel, in the background, I had been climbing a lot and had by this point had climbed the highest peaks in North and South America, Denali and Aconcagua. And so, pushing about age 40 at this point, or maybe a little past, I had the kind of climbing resume where you could begin to think seriously, like responsibly, about potentially climbing Mount Everest.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought ever about climbing Mount Everest, but I got thinking this is the mashup. So I thought, if I were to climb Mount Everest, I would want to like that would generate a whole lot of attention. A lot of people would be very excited. I could probably electrify this audience of biotech people around that climb of the highest mountain in the world.
Yeah.
But in order to do this, I've got to work really, really hard. I mean, physically, mentally, to get prepared for this thing. I don't think I'm really that motivated to just do it for myself. It has to be attached to a cause. And so I looked, and it turned out that I looked around for a good cause. The Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center, right in my backyard of Seattle. I've known them for years and years. I've interviewed many of their top scientists. They had a program in place called Climb to Fight Cancer, where people would climb a mountain and raise money from their friends and family to support cancer research. Now, nobody had ever done Mount Everest before, and that's
understandably
a big undertaking, and it involves some risk. So I had to make a proposal. So I made a proposal to the Fred Hutch. And at first they were like, wow, this is really kind of audacious. We're not sure about this. We need to talk with our lawyers.
What if you die?
Exactly.
We don't want
that
you
would
to
kind
die
of be
Yeah.
that would be bad for me and for them too.
Right.
So we figured this all out where we were all comfortable. And long story short, it was a huge success. I was able to, I had a goal of raising $175,000 for cancer research there, ended up doubling that to $340,000.
Wow.
And was able to summit the mountain, successfully on a beautiful day, clear skies, no crowds, and came back with no frostbite or anything.
Yeah.
So this was just a really big success, and it spawned what came next, which we now call the Timmerman Traverse, which is more inclusive of other people. Mm-hmm. So I thought of other mountains where people who are newer to the outdoors or with less experience could take on a good, appropriate challenge for them, and tap their networks and raise money for cancer research. So yeah. I personally couldn't climb a higher mountain than Mount Everest, but if I took a team of people to, say, climb Kilimanjaro, highest peak in Africa, doesn't require any technical mountaineering experience, and I could ask each of these biotech executives to raise something smaller but still significant, like $50,000. Simple math. Team of 20 people, which is actually doable on a mountain like Kilimanjaro. 20 people times $50,000 equals 1 million. So that's a big step up in the amount of money that could be raised. And have since run a couple of trips to Kilimanjaro, one to Everest Base Camp. There have been, there's been some other spinoffs too, but have ultimately raised, at last count, about $8 million through these expeditions for both cancer research and a newer campaign that's anti-poverty here in the US, which we could talk about too if you like.
For emerging biotechs, scaling the process development and manufacturing of biologic molecules to clinical standards can be challenging. However, you don't need to go it alone. Don't miss an episode of the Business of Biotech podcast, where we offer insights on regulatory, funding, and other essential topics. The pod is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva, a global provider of technologies and services that advance and accelerate the development, manufacture, and delivery of therapeutics. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/ emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech. I'm interested in that. I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, that's fantastic. Congratulations on the success there. I mean, and thank you, right? Thank you for the good work and the contributions you've made. Yeah, real quick, give me a little flavor on the anti-poverty initiative.
Well, so the first Kilimanjaro trip was 2019. Mm-hmm. And then this thing called COVID happened in 2020. And so the plans to go around the world and do other things went on hold. And like a lot of people, I was kind of, had a little bit of cabin fever sitting around the house wondering, when can I get outside and do things again?
Yeah.
And
I'll bet cabin fever probably hit you a little bit harder than it did the average bear.
It may. I was really itching to get outside with people and doing all these things. And so in international trips, for a while, as you probably remember, were going to be especially difficult with presenting vaccine tickets and passports and all this. So I thought could I do something domestic? And I was thinking of branching out toward Life Science Cares, which was an organization I became aware about through my reporting that was organizing the biotech community to give back to the most vulnerable members of the communities where we live and work, fighting poverty, doing things like covering the basics, like food and shelter for people in need, but also doing science education, which plays to the strength of the industry, and job training, like providing on-ramps for young people to potentially to learn about what is going on in this pretty amazing industry and potentially pursue careers in it. And there are a lot of opportunities there. Like this whole portfolio of nonprofits starting in Boston, but then in other hubs like San Francisco, San Diego, Philadelphia, and New York currently. Yeah. It's really branched out, and the organizing, the executive team, the board, there's an impressive group of people. I proposed to them something along the lines of a domestic sort of Kilimanjaro, which I thought of at the time would be the Presidential Traverse in New Hampshire. So I proposed this, right around when people were getting their vaccines and feeling better about getting together in groups and going outside. So we did the first one of these in September of 2021. In New Hampshire. And it was, the initial goal was, I thought, well, this is a shorter trip. I don't know if I can ask people to raise $50,000. It's only 2.5 days of hiking, but it's a beautiful part of the Appalachian Trail in New England in early fall. Maybe I'll ask people to raise $25,000 and a group of 20, to get enough people to have critical mass and to raise a meaningful amount. Initial goal was 500,000. And we raised 730,000 that first year to fight poverty. So we had this same kind of degree of fellowship, meaningful relationships formed on the trail. People had a great time. I knew that the model had spun off, a really good alternative that was shorter, that was domestic. That was for a different cause, but also something really important to a lot of people in biotech. And we've now done 3 this year. That was the third year of this campaign, and it's now exceeding $1 million a year. Yeah,
it's fantastic. It's also a lot of work. Like it's a ton of work. How do you reconcile or balance keeping the long run going, keeping the Timmerman report going, and managing and working through all these Timmerman Traverse events?
I'm a busy guy, Matt.
I know you're a busy guy, man.
A lot of balls.
Yeah.
But seriously, I thought about starting my own nonprofit to run this thing, but I preferred actually to partner with existing nonprofits. So Life Science Cares, Fred Hutch. Actually, I have a new beneficiary organization that I'm working with this year called Damon Runyon Cancer Research Foundation. But in this case, I have an existing nonprofit partner that handles a lot of the administrative piece of this, so that I am primarily focused on the identifying of recruits, recruiting of people, motivating them to hit their fundraising goals, working with them to, help tap some of the sponsors who might want to support this. But I trying to get better at delegating more of the work to the beneficiary organizations, and they've been terrific. Really, really fortunate to have them helping out.
Who's I want to talk a little bit about some of the, I guess attributes of Timmerman Traverse alumni. I mean, they're by and large biotech execs, VC, biotech VC folks, folks from industry. I mean, do you take folks from the supplier vendor community?
Yes.
Like, are there any I guess is there any are there any exclusions? Like, what we will not, we won't take X person along.
No. It's a very inclusive group of people. So there's about 100 people in the alumni network now. As you say, a lot of them are biotech executives, a few basic scientists, venture capitalists, people from large companies, small companies, men, women, people of color. I'm looking for geographic diversity as well. So East Coast, West Coast, some people in the Midwest or the Mountain West. So I'm striving to put together teams that are diverse and interesting in multiple ways. And that includes the type of work that you do. So there are people who work on antibodies, or there's cell therapy, or there are some high-tech people working on software. So the idea is that when you've got this group of 20 or so people, we're going to have a lot of interesting conversations around the dining tent. And we can learn from each other. And that's the way it's worked out. And it turns out people, they stay in touch for years. They're forming lifelong friendships on these trips, and they're calling on each other for advice and, making introductions for each other, sometimes doing professional work, like investing in each other's companies.
Sure.
It's great.
Do you hand pick them? Do they apply? What's that recruitment sort of process look like? Is it an application procedure, or do you go out and say, hand pick them and twist their arm to play?
I do handpick them. And, I keep a list of people who have, if I've ever interviewed someone who said, oh, I like to hike, or I was just on Mount Whitney or something, I make a note of that. And I will call that person 6 months later and ask them to join one of these trips. I mean, at some point I might have a little more formalized application process, but, right now, it's very much hand curated.
Mm-hmm. You just mentioned sort of the value of the relationship building that happens on these trips, personally and professionally, I'm sure. In fact, I mentioned from the outset that I'd been courting you as a guest for quite some time, and I don't know if I mentioned this to you the last time we spoke, but I publicly on my podcast called you out as as someone who I wanted on the pod while I was interviewing Bernat Ollier and Parag Shah, who are exemplary, I think, of this relationship that you mentioned. I believe they didn't know one another before they went on a Timmerman Traverse. As a result of their meeting there, and as you said, conversations around the dining tent and hiking together and having that amazing experience, Parag is now a lead investor for Vedanta Biosciences, Bernat's company. And I asked them, we talked about that on that episode of the podcast. We talked about their experience there. And I asked them, I was like, because we've all had like magical moments in the forest or the mountains or on the stream or whatever your magic place is. We've had magical moments with other people. And I remember pressing them a little bit on like, are you sure it wasn't just sort of the high of the experience that made this relationship happen? Like how do you looking back on it now, how do you gauge like the value of that interaction? And I mean, obviously they've been working together for quite a while now, and they're both seeing a lot of value in the relationship. So they fully, they fully rationalized the connection they made on the mountain. But I'm sure that happens like on every trip. There are probably stories untold to you of these relationships that happen.
Yeah, that's right. I often hear about it much later.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Bernard and Parag are a good example. I think that's right, that they did not know each other prior to doing the Presidential Traverse together for Life Science Cares. They did get to know each other or become familiar. At least, who are you? What do you do? And I think all kinds of studies have shown that we do business with people who we are already familiar with. It isn't just like you don't just automatically respond with a yes to a cold call, a telemarketer, right? I mean, so this is providing people the familiarity. I mean, they're accumulating social capital in a way, getting to know lots of people, and who knows where that will lead. But I do know that people they've joined each other's boards. They have made investments in each other's companies. There have been so many more informal interactions where it's just like, hey, I need to talk to an IP attorney. Who do you know that's good? And it's just like you easily pick up the phone and call that person who, you sweated a little bit with on the trail, you broke bread with around the picnic table when you were tired at the end of the day. You feel comfortable. There's a rapport there. And it's really wonderful to see.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it is. And I mean, the experiences that these people take with them when they're done, knowing not only that they did this physical thing, accomplished personal goals, made important professional relationships, and also contributed to a super meaningful cause. Like I said, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show was to just celebrate that. I mean, I know that you do a great job promoting the Timmerman Traverse. I see it all the time. It feeds my LinkedIn feed, for instance. And the people that are involved also do an excellent job promoting. But I wanted to take a minute and celebrate you in that effort as well on the podcast.
Well, thanks, Matt. I think there are a lot of people in this industry who care, who want to give back, and that this is providing a vehicle for them to do so in a fun and interesting way. And I'm just really, really thankful and fortunate to be in position to do it.
What's the next Timmerman Traverse project in the works?
So currently running a campaign for the Damon Runyon Cancer Research Foundation, taking a team of 22 people, I think, to Kilimanjaro in February. And so if anybody wants to check out the roster, who's doing that, and if you want to chip in and help them all hit their $50,000 fundraising goals, you can go to timmermanreport.com and hit Traverse up in the top of the page, and you can see that roster, and that'll take you to their fundraising pages at damonrunyon.org.
It's a fantastic setup. It really is. I'm talking about the way that you've presented that on the site. Each would you call them climber? What do you call your participants? Each.
Yeah, well,
Traverser.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know if you had like a nickname for your climbers, or.
Well, it's actually more hiking than climbing. Yeah. So that's one reason why I've switched to that term, Timmerman Traverse.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when you hear the word climbing, sometimes people think of ice axes and harnesses and taking risks, and that's not really what I'm asking people to do. Yeah. But they're participants, they're members of the Timmerman Traverse team.
So each one has their own, their bios up there. I think they have their own page and their own sort of fundraising site associated with the project. So to Luke's point, make sure you check that out. I want to, in the time that we have left, are you good? You got a few more minutes for me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. In the time we have, I know you're a busy guy. You got things to write. You got hikes to do. You got all sorts of stuff going on. So I want to be respectful of your time, but in the time that we do have left, I want to just get some of your thoughts on the space, like what you're seeing. Nothing in particular. I don't want you to comment on any specific financial deals or anything like that if you don't want to. But we're in an interesting time. Your history covering this space is far richer and deeper than mine. As like I said, I've been here for like 3 years, so I got to see the pre-COVID like steadiness. I got to see the COVID boom followed by the bust, the bubble, the financial markets turn around to the point where everyone's still complaining about that in emerging bio in particular. It's been a pretty rocky past 24 to 36 months. Where do you see that? I don't know. Maybe it's an unfair question to ask you, but where do you see it going? Like what do you see sort of on the horizon?
Oh, well, I think things are going to get better. Call me an optimist.
That's an unpopular approach for a trade pressman, right? Aren't trade press supposed to be all doom and gloom, right?
Well,
like, you're not doing a layoff. Aren't you doing a layoff tracker, Luke?
Yeah, well, I happen to have my own view on this, which is that I've seen this movie before. This is a cyclical business. It's really, it'll give you whiplash, the ups and downs. But we're in this down trough of disillusionment right now. It's going on close to 3 years of hardship for especially the early stage companies without developing products seeking to raise capital. So it's investors still have plenty of money. But they're being much more picky and risk averse about where they put it to work. There's just like the preclinical or platform kind of companies are finding it very difficult to get going. They're finding it hard to meet their milestones. They're doing layoffs and cutting back programs. You've seen all the news. But that money is still there. It is being deployed for, more near-term clinical stage assets that we've seen this before with the Great Recession of kind of the 2009 to 2012 period. It also happened after the genomics bust in the early 2000s. The difference now is that there's been so much progress in the enabling technologies. Our ability to sequence all the multi-omic and imaging technologies, our understanding of the biology is way, way better than in previous downturns. And there's just like more and more practice changing therapies and diagnostics coming out the other side of this innovation pipeline. For cancer, just for one, I mean, there is so much innovation coming through in the phase 2, phase 3 trials that just would have been top of the fold, like newspaper stories in 10 or 20 years ago, and they're not really being fully recognized by the markets or the general public. But I see like fundamentally really good things coming out, real products coming out of this community. And so I think this is just a matter of time for the interest rates situation needs to settle down. The global macroeconomic situation needs to settle down.
Yeah.
A few more positive blockbuster releases of products from the big companies, and then we'll be back in a more steady and normal financial environment.
Yeah, for some legs to grow on, a couple more legs to grow under some of these therapies and techs and modalities that are causing so much excitement right now. Which among those, without naming specific companies, I don't expect you to do that, but which among the, I guess, new technologies and therapeutic approaches, modalities, are you finding most exciting? Like what are you most excited about? Is that a fair question to ask a journalist? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sort of a pundit as well at this point. I have my opinions. I get this bird's eye view, so I'm lucky. So I think of this in a couple different categories. There are the technologies, the tools for interrogating basic biology. So it's some of those things I just said: genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, at the single cell resolution level in many cases. There's imaging. So cryo-EM images, there's super microscopy for live imaging of cells. The spatial biology, like there are companies that are offering tools that can help us ask and answer questions about basic disease pathology at high precision, high speed, low cost. That was just absolutely unfathomable 10 or 20 years ago. So I'm really excited about those tools for understanding basic biology. Now, when you have those tools available for, just about every modern, well-equipped lab, they'll have access one way or another, either their own tool or their ability to contract out to somebody else who can help. Then we've got all these modalities. You can fit the right tool for the task. So when I started many, many moons ago, all we really had for tools were small molecules and recombinant proteins. Yep. Monoclonal antibodies being one, promising area 20 years ago. But now we have cell therapy, gene therapy, bispecific antibodies, antibody drug conjugates, targeted protein degraders, different types of small molecules. I mean, RNA interference, the whole oligonucleotide space. These were scientific ideas that were kicking around in labs 20 years ago. Now, everything that I just mentioned, all those modalities have FDA-approved actual products. Yeah. And those are products that are really, really helping people, and making a big difference for a lot of people with disease. And there's a whole lot more in the pipeline behind those first mover products in each of those modality categories. So, I mean, when you take together that better understanding of the basic biology, along with a whole toolkit that's just brimming with different tools, the modern biotech company can figure out the right tool for the task, do what it does, run the experiments. Again, this is why I'm bullish for the long term, that we're living in a biotech century and we're going to get major advances in therapies. We're already getting them, and we're going to get a lot more of them over the next 10 and 20 years. Yeah.
I like your outlook. It's not just bullish and optimistic for sake of Luke Timmerman being an optimist. It's you just backed it up. I love it. You heard it right here, folks. Luke Timmerman just gave you cause to be bullish, investor community.
I think it's a good time to be starting a biotech company. I really do.
Yeah, agreed. I've abused your time, and I've abused the time of. I don't think I've abused our audience's time, because I think this has been super enlightening and entertaining to listen to. But we're gonna save the rest for another day. I'm hoping now that I've had you on as a guest, you'll be agreeable to come back sometime and visit with us again and talk about what's going on in Timmerman's world and the greater space.
Well, this is fun. Thanks for having me, Matt.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you coming on. I enjoyed it too. So thanks for joining me.
All right.
That's the one and only Luke Timmerman. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Life Science Connect with support from Cytiva, which demonstrates its commitment to new biopharma companies at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. Check that out. Go to bioprocessonline.com/BOB to sign up for the Business of Biotech newsletter. And make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. In the meantime, thanks for listening.